there's a lot more of you than I thought. My name is Matt, and I'm an alcoholic.
Amen.
Thanks for having me speak tonight. So, where it all began. You know, I was born at a very young age, and from that moment on, it was always an uphill battle. When I was born, I had open heart surgery at 3 days old. I was born 10 weeks early, and I blame that mainly on my height. I figured there could have been a lot of growing in those 9 weeks. But ever since I was little, you know, I always thought there was something different about me. And I've got very vivid memories of just events throughout my childhood and young age where I wanted to be like everybody else, and at the exact same time, I wanted nothing to do with everybody else. I wanted to be the star of the show, but I also wanted to be behind the curtain and running the show. And I think that kind of mentality is something that has played heavily on my heart as far as things went by and my life progressed. I was just always in this weird state of not belonging, wanting to, or not. I just never felt like I was okay in my own skin. I was raised in a pretty well off. You know, my dad's a doctor, made really good money, put us through private school. I went to Catholic school until I was a junior in high school, and we lived in a nice house. We had everything was pretty much provided for us. My dad wasn't around much, but that was okay. I mean, he signed really big checks. And me being the firstborn son, I think my birth and the trouble with that guilted my dad into giving me literally anything I asked for. And I didn't realize it or take advantage of it until I was older, but just looking back, I realized that was definitely a crutch and helped me a lot as far as enabling things to come. I remember in high school that drinking was something, you know, taboo. My sister was a year older than me. She never did it. And you start hanging around people and they start talking. And I remember going out with some friends. We'd get back to their house and they had Seagram's Lime Gin and Gatorade. And I remember drinking it, sitting down on the ground, and we were playing video games. And sitting down, we could just throw them down. Sitting down, we were just throwing them down. And then I had to go to the bathroom, so I stood up. And it was like, whoa, that was a lot. And the only thing I remember about that night was trying to throw up out of a window and it hitting the screen and came back at me. And the next day I felt like an absolute train wreck. And at school, they were, you know, the kids I was with that night, I mean, we had all just, I mean, that basement, I feel so sorry for that kid's mom. But I remember that, like, over the next week at school, it became like, oh, well, even though that happened, I mean, we were 14 and 15 years old, and this was funny to laugh at. You know, there's Matt, there's the guy that threw up, but at the same time, he was also the guy that drank, so that's cool. He at least does that. And so I started trying to fit in that way. It was one way I could try and fit in was drinking. I started, I know this is a program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but we started smoking pot too, and that became another thing that was just like, all right, this is what we do. And going to Catholic schools, you find out really quickly that if you're only smoking pot and drinking, you're considered poor. Most of the kids were into way harder stuff, and it never really interested me. What interested me was getting away from everybody there. And one way I found out I could solve that was through drinking. And if I couldn't get drunk or find someone to get alcohol, then it became NyQuil during the day. And I could fake that. I could just get medicine head and just float through whatever it was. I got kicked out of that private high school for the suspicion of selling weed. They never actually could prove it, but that's what I got fired or expelled for. And I went to a public high school, which where I found this group of friends that I loved. I found my place. I could fit in with these guys. We didn't drink too much. We didn't do this kind of stuff. I felt like I belonged with these kids. And that lasted about 3 or 4 months. And then we started going to the high school parties. And real quick, when I wasn't drinking, I learned that I really wasn't that much fun to be around. But if Matt had a couple, and I could keep it to a couple back then things became a lot more fun. Definitely things had bad nights, and there were instances of me getting absolutely obliterated, but at the same time, like most of the time, I could really control it. I got through high school. We did pretty good there. I started going to college. I went to a little community college because my grades weren't good, and my dad said, I'm not paying for you to go to the University of Georgia Southern when you're gonna just flunk your way out. And I was like, yeah, why do I always do that? And that was one thing, it was another part of my personality I learned. Not only did I want to belong and not belong at the same time, I also wanted to be really smart. And whenever I got something good because of something I did, something I worked hard for and earned, I always threw a wrench in it. So it came down to projects. That was a huge thing, was school projects. Whenever I had a school project, I'd go all up until the night before, and then I'd toss it in the trash and go in the next day with nothing. And I to this day, I'm not even sure what you would call that kind of behavior, but to me, that's my alcoholism. That's how it manifested itself. It wasn't a huge part of drinking in the early days. It was the action of the kind of paradoxes that I put myself through. I got into college, kind of bummed around there. I remember, and this is interesting, but on my 21st birthday, I remember I drove to the gas station where I always bought my cigarettes, and I picked up a 6-pack of Heineken. I went to the guy and I was like, all right, I got my ID, I'm gonna get carded, this will be cool. He didn't card me, and I was furious, and he said, I said, why didn't you card me? He said, well, this is the first time you've ever come in here smiling. And I knew something was up, so I figured you turned 21. I was like, well, I did. He's like, okay, can I see your ID? I was like, sure. Yeah. And I felt all right. I had 21st birthday. I drank 2 beers and went to sleep. I had homework. I had stuff to do for the next day. That was the beginning of, college for me. Moving through college, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a business major. I wanted to do underwater basket weaving. I wanted to, anything I could, there was just always something else that interested me beyond what I wanted to. I had different groups of friends. I hung out with ravers. I hung out with preps. I hung out with jocks. I mean, it was a good time to be hanging out with a bunch of people in school. When I wasn't in school, my dad had funded me an apartment. I had a 3-bedroom apartment to myself, and I spent most of the time alone. Every now and then I would have friends come over, or people would ask to come over, and I'd invite them over, and we'd do things and whatnot, but it was not really a lot of me inviting people. I got really close to one guy that I worked with, and we became inseparable best friends, and partially because I think we had very, very similar attitudes, which were, I hate myself, I am a failure, I'm never going to achieve, but I'm going to try. And we went through college together thinking that. And I remember one night very specifically, I guess we had a couple of beers, and he confided into me, a bunch of deep stuff about his past, and I was like, man, I can't relate to any of that. And like, why am I as messed up as this kid is when he's got this whole long line of past history that kind of in my mind explained my behavior? Because I took a bunch of psychology classes. I wanted to find out what was wrong with me. And it's like, man, this kid has a right to feel this way. I don't. And it just plagued me more, the thought of why am I this way? Why do I just feel out of my skin all the time? A month or two later, I'd had some other friends that asked themselves over, and they had all sorts of dry goods and alcohol, and we were kind of enjoying ourselves. And I looked down at my phone. It was my best friend James calling me, and that night I didn't pick up the phone. And the next day, around 9:30 in the morning, I got a call from his dad. And the night before, he had put a gun in his mouth. And I held on to that and blamed myself for his death up until about 3 years ago. It was vicious what that did to me. I started getting into anything I could get my hands on. Whatever would numb it out, whatever would solve it, whatever would blanket, anything. I went to therapy for it, and I told my therapist, like, I'm drinking heavily. When I don't drink, I do something else. I just alternate between one thing or another. I can't deal with this. And I went to therapy with her and I did my stuff at home, alone. And then I met a girl. And I thought that saved me. I'm free. I don't need therapy anymore. I got a girlfriend. I'm getting back on my feet. I'm working again, doing this kind of stuff. All right. And I started going to church. And hadn't gone to church since Catholic high school, really. Before then, in Catholic high school, one of the things they do is you get confirmed. It's the personal promise of yourself to God, and I'm going to stay a Catholic. It's basically like a grown-up baptism. I acknowledge the fact that I'm a Catholic, and I'm going to continue to be a Catholic. And I had decided at that point I didn't want to be a Catholic anymore, and I told my mom, and she said, well, if you don't make the decision if you don't make the personal choice to be a Catholic, then you don't need the keys to your 1997 Acura Integra. And I said, okay, I'll be confirmed. And so I kept my car, and I started going to church again. I was 23, 24, and I found my way back into, Mass and going to church and working with youth groups. I found out it was great to go to Mass and have fun with a bunch of 14 and 15-year-olds if you smoke a ton of weed before you do it. And that's kind of how I did things. At some point, with this youth group, I realized that my drinking had started to pick up. I was drinking a little bit more. I made the decision to drive drunk, and I got a DUI. I got that DUI, and I was so happy that I got pulled over at a roadblock instead of having rear-ended or killed some people. And that's what I prided myself on, was like, man, I'm glad I got caught. Most people would be so mad, but I'm glad I got caught. Went to DUI school, completely drunk. That was cool. I was on probation, and I found out that if I moved with my job to another state, my probation officer couldn't drug test me or make me take these alcohol swabs. Every week I went into probation, I had to pee in a cup. And they swabbed my gums for alcohol, and I was like, why are y'all doing that? And they're like, well, it says here, you said you smoked weed and you drank alcohol, so every week you gotta pay $15 for us to test you. And I was like, but they're all coming back clean. And I thought it was only fair that I moved to Colorado, because I want to stick it to them, right? I moved to Colorado, microbrew capital of the world, and I became the biggest beer snob. I started drinking everything. I started drinking on the way home from work because I earned it. I'm working as a butcher now. I'm not going to college, but I'm working as a butcher, earn my way home. So I'm driving drunk, I'm drinking more, I'm doing okay. I'm managing. I am a self-diagnosed, loving myself, calling myself this. I am a functional alcoholic. And I told people and I bragged about it. This is what I do. This is what everybody in the butching community does. You go, you get drunk, you get obliterated, you get up at 5:30, you go into work, and you stand in a 34-degree cooler, and you breathe that air in, and it just kills the hangover. It's almost gone. I've had it, every now and then you had to drink a bottle of water, and that was okay. But the hard work pretty much solved it. And I was doing good. I met another girl. And this one kind of stuck. This one was something important to me. And she was going to West Point, United States Military Academy, and I decided I'm going to better myself. I'm going to go back to school. So I decided to go into education and become a teacher. And I got into educating. I started school. Things were going good. My drinking somehow just continued. I remember one winter I had got a cold. Normally I'm a beer drinker at this point, and I got a cold. And I remember my grandma saying, when you get a cold and your throat's sore, get some Jack Daniels, put it in a shot glass, put a little bit of salt in there, and then heat it up in the microwave for 5 seconds, and gargle it. And I tried that, and I about threw up. Whiskey is one thing when you hold it in your mouth compared to when you swallow it. And I just said, well, I'm just going to start swallowing it. And it was like a light switch turned on in my brain. This is where it's at. This is when my drinking just started going crazy. That one sip of whiskey, I remembered it exactly. Because after that, I lived downtown in Denver. I could ride the bus everywhere for free with my student ID. Man, I got it made. I got bars left and right. I've got everything I need. And, things are good. So I remember basically every night after this, I drank at least a pint of whiskey a night, along with as much beer as I could hold. And the blackout started. At first it was once every now and then again, and then it became a little bit more constant and more constant. Somehow I got through school, straight A's. I finished my teaching degree, I got it, I was doing all right. My drinking started, getting heavier and heavier, to a point where my girlfriend at the time decided, hey, maybe we should try not drinking. And I was like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I remember this. We were at the pool. We're hanging out at her apartment pool. And I said, yeah, it's a good idea. We get back home, we'll think about not drinking. And we get back home, and I flop down on the couch because I'm half drunk already. And I hear, glug, 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 glug. Glug, 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 glug. And I look over, and she's pouring my 30-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon. Don't judge the price. It was a very hipster, cool thing to drink in Denver at this time. And I was like, why are you dumping out the beer? And she goes, well, you can stop drinking. And I said, well, we got to finish it all. You don't just stop drinking. We got to finish everything. And that led just to me drinking again and more until I decided, I had someone at my student teaching. I started my internship. Got great grades, started my student teaching. One of my teachers told somebody that I smelled like alcohol. And they brought me in and said, hey, we got to do something about this. You can't smell like alcohol, so you need to wear clothes. I said, all right. I brought that idea home to my wife, and she goes, I think you need something else. And I said, well, we'll see. I went to my first AA meeting, 250 people sitting inside a giant, beautiful church, a Sunday morning, porches outside. It's like, man, this is not the group of AA that I thought would be here. And immediately I felt that feeling of not belonging. I don't belong here. This is too crazy for me. They asked if there were any newcomers. I did not raise my hand. I did not go up front. I stood in the back. I did this for about 3 weeks until some people found me and told me, hey, you look new here. What's your name? And I started talking to them. One said, I'll be your sponsor. I said, okay. He goes, hey, let's go to this coffee shop. We went to the coffee shop. He pulled out a book. It was big and blue. We read that book for about 3.5 hours, and he said, you've done steps 1, 2, and 3. And I said, okay, great, next one. He goes, if you need me, call me. We'll get to the rest of it now. I said, okay, so at one point, I decided to call him. I said, hey, you told me to call you. And he goes, are you going to drink? I was like, I don't think so. And he goes, okay. And he hung up. And I continued to not drink and make meetings. And I got to about 3 months, 4 months. I went and heard a lot of good stuff. I loved the community. I loved hearing what you said. You said things like, fake it till you make it. So I pretended to have 85 years of sobriety. And I started saying things that were repeated to me time and time again, like I made them up. And it worked briefly. It worked for about 3 months. And then I decided after a meeting, I'm going to go get drunk. And I went out and got drunk. I hadn't really, honestly, done any steps or any work. I went back out, and it was, everybody knows this story, it was worse than the first time. I got so drunk and so hammered so quick. Only after 3 months, my drinking picked up to about 2 pints of whiskey a night. And I figured the best thing to do at this point in my life, I'm going to propose to my girlfriend. And I proposed to her. She said yes, and I was like, good, I'm in. I'm moving to China. And I moved to China. I figured to myself, it's got to be so hard to get alcohol in China. I found out really quickly, there's no drinking age in China. You can go to a liquor store and there's like 5-year-olds buying beer for their parents. Like they just send them on down. It's like one of the things they do. But my drinking spiraled out of control in China. By the time I was there 6 months, I had to come back home. I was so sick. I came back home. My wife kind of picked up the pieces, or my girlfriend picked up the pieces. I got a temporary job doing some tutoring, and my drinking just kept getting worse. There were a couple of instances of, I remember my family, I remember with my girlfriend, we had 2 dogs, and I left the house completely sober, walking my dog. So I'm going to take Marshall on a walk. Walked, smoked a couple cigarettes. I wake up in a drunk tank. I don't have my shirt, I don't have my shoes, I don't have my wallet, I don't have my cell phone, I don't have anything. I'm in a muddy pair of shorts. And I was so drunk. And I was like, I have no clue how this happened. About noon, after being there and being put into this little like drunk tank detainment center with other people that had been pulled in for intoxication the night before, my wife finally showed up to pick me up. And she goes, yeah. So Marshall comes home at about 1 a.m. I was like, the dog made it home? She goes, yeah. And I called the cops because I have no clue where you were, and they told me about this guy that they had picked up near the apartment complex that was banging on some girl's door saying he needed to come in, and she called us, and we were going to take him home, but he refused to speak. All he said is, you can talk to my attorney. And all we wanted to know was where he lived so we could drop him off. And yeah, no, it was awful. It got worse. You know, I got a job teaching in 2 hours away from my wife, and at this point I was drinking 2.5 to 3 pints of whiskey a night, and we got married. We got married August 20th of, I don't know, one of those years, 2012 it was, and yeah, August 20th, 2012, we got married. This is my first year really teaching, and I'm living in her parents' house, drinking to a point where I didn't tell anyone I drank because I didn't want them to see the way I had to drink. Drinking became a complete obsession. I told myself every morning I couldn't do this again. I told myself that on the drive home, and I got to the exit. And instead of turning left to go home, I was praying to God that I would make that left-hand turn. I always turned right and went to the liquor store and picked up, you know, a pint or two, and along with beers. And I drank until I blacked out. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. It was my wife's parents' house, so I figured the smart thing for me to do at this point in time was to start drinking upstairs while I did my work, and then I would sit on the stairs and scoot down on my butt, so I didn't fall down the stairs. And then I would scoot my way over to the coffee table in the basement where I could sit and drink, because if I sat down on the floor at the coffee table, when I inevitably would pass out, I wouldn't fall that far. I thought I was a genius. All right? It's the same time where, you know, at the same point in time I was drinking beers outside and smoking cigarettes, and I'd always ash in the beer cans, and then all of a sudden I'd run out of beer. It's like, well, I got all these beer cans and they're mostly full. There's a lot more beer in there. And a few cigarette butts. Coffee filters? Sounds like a good idea. And so I would filter coffee or beer through coffee filters to get the cigarette ashes out so I could drink 20 to 30 ounces of beer before going into work at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it got to a point where I blacked out one day, and I came to, and it's lunchtime at school, And my kids are leaving to go to lunch, and they said, "Mister, that was the best lesson you ever taught." And I said to myself, "Oh my God, I'm done. I can't do this anymore." That night, my wife called me and said, "What's this charge?" I had been telling her for a year that I'd sobered up. And I think on some level she wanted to believe it, on some level she didn't, but as long as I said it, it was good enough for her. She said, "What's this charge?" I guess I'd been using the joint account card to buy the alcohol instead of my personal checking card. And something in me clicked. And I gave up. And I told her I'm drinking. I told her I'm done. I said, "I just can't do this, but I've been drinking heavily and I need help." And she said, "What about AA? It worked for you before and you gave me every reason not to go back, but it seems like the only thing that kept you sober." And I said, "I'll give it another shot." So September 17th, 2012, I walked into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there were 4 people sitting there. There were 4 old guys. Literally 110 years of sobriety between the 4 of them. And I walked in, and with my tail between my legs, and I said, "I need help." And they said, "Well, I'll go get you help." And since that day, I've been sober. That was 6 years ago, and changed. Since then, my life has drastically gotten better. Things that started happening to me as a result of listening to what people were saying this time in AA. Instead of hearing something that I thought sounded cool, I started listening, which means I was paying attention to what the words meant, and I was applying them and thinking about them and kind of figuring them out. I was 60 days sober, and I walked into a meeting, and the chairperson looked at me and said, "Hey, Matt, how much time do you have?" And I was like, "I'm getting my 2-month shift today." And she said, "Great, you're chairing the meeting." And I sat down, and I was scared to death. And I remember I sat there. A few other people walked in. I said, "Hey, guys, you know me, I'm new. I have to chair the meeting." And they're like, "We'll help you." And they did. They helped me every step of the way get through that meeting. And somehow that feeling of not belonging and wanting to throw a wrench in every friendship that I made kind of disappeared with that group of people. I wanted to be around these people, and I didn't not want to be around them. This is the first time that, really, I wasn't pushing people away. And ever since then, I remember that ever since that meeting, I've really been, pretty open to new people in my life. And AA has really been the most unbelievable thing that can happen. I've encountered so much from working the steps and practicing the principles that we learn here. I started working the steps with my sponsor, and we got to about the 4th step, and I started relaxing on it, and I didn't want to write down my inventory. I had a couple pages, I wrote a couple more. 7 months later, I wrote a little bit more, and I just kind of threw it off, and I'm going to chill on that. And my life started changing. Things were getting better. I moved back. I got another teaching job close to my wife. We were pregnant at this time. We had a baby that was conceived sober. And it was amazing seeing this little thing on September 24th, 2013, she was. And it was amazing. I remember I went into a men's meeting and got my year chip. The next week on the same day, I walked back into that men's meeting, and they said, "Why are you here?" Or I told them my daughter was born today. And they said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because I really want to drink." And that was one of those instances where I learned that it's not about, with me at least, it wasn't about the good times, or it wasn't about the bad times that I was really scared of drinking. With me, it was always, let's celebrate. Now would be a great time for a drink. Look at all that hard work I did supporting my wife while she pushed this baby out. That really was it. It was a pat on myself. I'm going to do this. Yeah, I did it. I need to drink. I need to be. If I go into a bar and tell everyone there that my daughter was born today, man, I would get so many free drinks. This would be totally cool. I got a year of sobriety. And those are the kinds of thoughts that would go through my head. A couple months later, my wife called me while I was at work and said, Matt, what is this? And I was like, I don't know. You're on the phone. And she said, that black and white composition book? And I was like, yeah, the one that says 4th step, don't open. She goes, I read it. And my 3-month-old daughter was in the house with her at this time. And I said, okay, what's going to happen? And she goes, I'm leaving. I said, all right. I told you not to read that book. She goes, well, it just opened to the page where you told me about, you just said everything you did, so I just kept reading. I was like, oh, okay. So she said, bye. She packed up. She decided she's going to go. And immediately the first thought in my mind was, I need to drink. So I got in my car and I started driving. I saw a church. I pulled in. So I'm just going to sit here and smoke some cigarettes for a minute. And eventually people started walking into the building. And I was like, well, I'll go in and see what's up. I walked into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous I'd never been to or heard of before. I had no clue how I ended up there. But it kept me sober that night. It kept me sober to a point where I could call my sponsor at the time and say, hey, remember that 4th step I haven't done? He goes, yeah, dumbass. I said, well, my wife read it. And he goes, yeah, dumbass. I said, we got to do it. And he goes, right, dumbass. Let's meet at McDonald's tomorrow morning. It was a Sunday. We met at McDonald's the next day, and I read my entire 4th step to him in McDonald's. And it was awful. It was really awful because of what was the main reason I was doing it. It really wasn't as much for me. It was to get something out of it. And I did it. I did my 4th step. I started looking at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I told my wife, and she said she really couldn't find anywhere else to go, so she came back after a couple of days, and I didn't know what to do. And after a week or so, she brought up the idea, the point that, man, you've said you're sorry. You asked what you could do to fix it. She goes, I don't think you've ever in your entire life been so honest about anything. I am so glad you didn't buy me flowers. I'm so glad you didn't buy me chocolate. Well, I kind of wanted the chocolate. But she goes, the only reason I'm back here is because what I read in that book happened before you sobered up. And the person that you've become as a result of being in AA is the reason I'm back. And I call that a miracle in my mind. That's God working, because any West Point graduate that's in med school with poor eyesight, low standards, and, a head on her shoulders she's not gonna stay with me. She'd pick another ugly short guy to be. And she stayed. And my sponsor told me, he goes, I remember when I told you, don't talk about the program, be the program, work the program, don't tell her everything we do. And I didn't, and sobriety has been unbelievable. I've had 2 daughters in this program. Both of them are just gorgeous in my eyes. And I love the way that they're becoming and growing, and they're not having to see some of the things that I witnessed when I was growing up, and my mom being drunk on the couch and those kinds of things. My kids get to see me being active participants in their lives, and that's one of the coolest things that I've seen in sobriety. I've had issues in sobriety left and right. I've been sober 6 years, and that's about as long as I drank hard. So I'm right at the point where it's been about 12 years of me drinking hard and then sobering up. And looking back at the drunk times and what I see now, almost day to day, you can see this exponential growth of where I was versus where I am. And, things haven't always been 100% perfect, but being sober has given me the ability to work on becoming a better human being. It's given me the ability to change the way I perceive the problems that I'm having. It's taught me to experience pain and use it as a strength later. I remember my daughter was teething, and she was teething. She was 9 months old. It was my 2nd month of being a stay-at-home Army father. We had just moved to Hawaii. I had completely severed my AA relationships in Colorado. It was, I can't get in touch with these people. I'm in a different time zone. Things are just crazy. I grabbed a guy at a meeting and was like, "You're going to be my sponsor." He goes, "Okay." And I remember my daughter was teething, and she was just nonstop crying, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to give her everything, and she wouldn't calm down. And I called my sponsor, and he was like, "Matt, what's going on?" I said, "I'm at the end of my rope, dude. I can't do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's going to be me or this kid. This kid's going to drive me nuts. Or I have no clue what's going to happen. All I know is something is about to happen. I'm at the end of my rope, man." He said, "Whose rope? Whose rope are you at the end of?" "Mine." He goes, "Oh, it's your rope." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Make it longer." And I threw my phone across the room, and it broke into 1,000 pieces. And I started thinking about what he had to say, and he was telling me, you can control what's going on. You can control you, right? You got to do it. And then I started remembering, what do they say when there's a crying baby and you can't handle yourself? You put the baby down and you walk outside for 10 minutes. And I did that, and the baby quit crying. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. All I got to do is neglect my child and they'll be quiet." No, but the baby slept through the night, and I slept through the night. And eventually, when I did get a phone, I called my sponsor back, and I was like, "Hey man, I'm so sorry about that. It was exactly what I needed to hear." And he goes, I know. You can hate me tomorrow, but I know." And working with a guy that knows what I've been through and knows what I'm going through is exactly what I need today. That was just one instance of the trials and tribulations of what it's like being sober. I mean, having to get another job and being responsible and moving from Hawaii. We were there for 3 years in the glorious sun-baked area of Kailua, Hawaii. I was going to meetings on Saturday morning on the beach, watching people kick off kayaks and surfboards and paddle boards, and we're sitting right there in a giant group of like 50, 60 people. And you get your alohas. When people had anniversaries, they got beads and wreaths. I mean, you call them leis, but they're like giant amounts of leis on people, and kukui bead necklaces and all sorts of craziness. And this was amazing. And then we're moved to Southern Pines, North Carolina. And I walk into a meeting here in this building because I'd heard about it from a group of people. They said, "Hey, there's a building in Southern Pines, right around there. There's a building, and it's pretty much all they do there is AA. It's called a community center, but all they do there is AA. You need to go there. It's cool." So this was the first meeting I came to. And I remember my first meeting, and I remember Mac was here, and I remember a lot of faces that I don't see anymore. But it was cool. It was cool because, one, I said I was from Hawaii, and y'all were like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm the cool outsider. They're gonna love my AA, and I don't like these accents." And real quick, it really got real because I had to go back and relearn AA and re-practice those things once again. I did it from Colorado to Hawaii. Now I'm doing it here in the Sandhills, and just practicing what I'm doing, and I'm still trying. But some of the things, I'm blessed today. I was just telling one of my friends, and you guys are my friends. I really don't have many people I contact outside of this program because that's just who I am. You guys are the people I click with, so I love it. But I was just telling one of my friends, I'm tired, I'm overworked, I'm underpaid, I'm so freaking happy. I really am. I wanted to be a teacher. And this is my first year. I taught a little bit last year, but this is the first year I've had these kids from the beginning. And I've only been with them for a couple of months, and they already hate my jokes. But it's been unbelievable that I can be here teaching these kids right at the same time of the year when I did it the first time, where I was blacked out drunk, and now I'm like, these kids have seen me teach. And it is the coolest feeling in the world to be able to do what you want to do and have the strength from a higher power pushing you to be the person that you want to become. And I'm starting to really get a grip on loving myself these days. I really am. That's why I think I love telling jokes, and I love being happy because I can start to like myself a little bit. And I guess to wrap it up, this program has done for me what it's done for you. You know, it's changed everything about who I am. And I love the little butterfly I've become. And yeah, I give it all up to this program. You know, there's power up above I choose to call God. And it's really been a blessing to be here. And I thank you guys. You did so well putting up with me. I'm just so grateful. Anyway, that's all I got. Any questions?